Hey, work from homers, Adam Schrader here. We love bringing you this podcast, and thousands of you have proven that it's been helpful for you. But since time and online storage space aren't free, Naresh and I wanted to come to you personally to ask for your financial support through Patreon. Go to patreon.com/workfromhomeshow and help support the show. And we appreciate your support at any amount you choose. That's patreon.com/workfromhomeshow. Thanks for your support. Let's get to the show.
Forced to work from home by your employer? Laid off or feeling depressed at home? Do you want to make money working from anywhere? We'll show you how to do it from your couch. It's time for another episode of the Work From Home Show. Coming to you from their homes in Austin, Texas and Tampa, Florida, here are your hosts, Adam and Naresh.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Work From Home Show. I'm Naresh Vissa, along with Adam Schrader. Shout out to all our homies, homeboys, homegirls, home trans, all the work from homers out there. Today we have Yoon Ha Lee on the show. Yoon Ha Lee is a New York Times bestselling author of the Machineries of Empire space opera novels, including Dragon Pearl and Ninefox Gambit, as well as the new book, Tiger Honor. Without further ado, Yoon Ha Lee, welcome to the Work From Home Show.
I'm very honored to be here.
It's truly an honor to have you on. You have really, really taken off in your writing career. And I want to first ask about your background, because you went from Cornell and Stanford math and graduate school student to New York Times best-selling author writing fiction. Can you walk us through that journey?
Sure. I actually decided back in third grade to become a writer because I had an inspirational teacher named Mr. McCracken, dressed up as Storyman every week in a Superman costume, I think it was.
And where was this? Where did you grow up?
I grew up partly in South Korea and partly in Houston. So this was back in Seoul Foreign School in South Korea.
Okay, I'm from Houston also.
Yeah, I wanted to be a writer, but by the time I got to college, I realized that being a writer is usually a really great way to starve, because not everybody makes the income of a Stephen King or a J.K. Rowling. So I decided to major in math so that I could have a day job and write on the side. And I really love mathematics. It's beautiful. It has sort of the structure and clarity, and it's all about seeing patterns. And it's something I enjoyed very much. But then my kid came along, and I decided, well, I've got to do this for a while. And I just kept my hand in writing, and eventually got published. So that's how it happened.
Can you talk a little bit about writing your books while still having a full-time job? Because that's something that a lot of people are struggling with, is pursuing their passions while still having that full-time job that they can't leave yet because they don't want to be starving.
Yes, I understand that very well. I had this one job as an admin assistant, and what I would do was I would get up early. And this was back when Borders still existed. This was in Boston, downtown Crossing. I would go to that Borders cafe, and for an hour before my job started, I would sit down and write. And, you can't get a ton of writing done in 1 hour, but if you add up that 1 hour over 365 days, it all adds up. This is like calculus, right? Infinitesimals will add up to sometimes a very big sum. So the other thing that I learned to do was sometimes I would write on my lunch break. I was very fortunate in that my husband was supportive. So when I got off work, he would watch the kid for, a little bit of time, and I would go down to a cafe, or I would sit in my study and write. So it's all about, you have to be ruthless about time management, and especially that goes double if you have kids or other dependents. But whatever time you can scratch out of the day, if it's a lunch break or that 10 minutes that you have between meetings, just scribble down a sentence or a paragraph, and eventually it will add up.
I completely agree. I'm a writer myself, not in the fiction space, and that's going to be my next question. But I did want to share that cell phones, I know they're an enemy to many people, but that Notes app on the iPhone has
Hmm.
been great for me to just, like you said, scribble paragraphs and paragraphs. In fact, I've written an entire book on my Notes app on the iPhone,
Oh wow, that's
but
a
like a 200 plus page book. Now, I write mostly nonfiction. Almost 99% of my writing is nonfiction. Why did you decide to go into fiction and fantasy, or fantasy and fiction?
I think because the stories that the books, so I do love nonfiction as well, and it's actually most of what I read. Like I read a lot of military history and linguistics and stuff like that. But the books that really helped me get through childhood were adventure stories. In third grade, again, going back to Mr. McCracken, we read A Wrinkle in Time by Madeleine L'Engle, and we read the Narnia books by C.S. Lewis. And later, I would discover science fiction novels like Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card. And I really wanted to sort of imagine a world that is not our world, because I always longed for a place where I could pretend that I belonged and that I fit in. And an imaginary world seemed like a perfect way to have that kind of escapism.
And when did you realize that your writing was good enough to get in publications and to take the people to publish and do all of that? When did you get that confidence?
Well, I have to admit at this point that I started submitting stories to adult markets when I was in sixth grade. And I don't know if I would call it confidence so much as pure ignorance. I was like, well, I have a story and it's complete, and I have learned how to type it in proper manuscript format, because back then most people were using typewriters. And I sent it in, and of course I got the rejection slips because, sixth grade story, it's not very good. But I developed that thick skin and that sort of, well, this time I didn't get in, but maybe next time I will get in. I developed that attitude. And I kept submitting stories, and I actually made my first sale right after I went to college as a college freshman. And the acceptance letter went all the way to my parents in South Korea, and they had to forward it to Cornell. And that was my first sale after 6 years of writing really not very good stories.
You said you grew up in South Korea. At what age did you move to the United States, and how long did you live in South Korea?
Oh, so this is complicated. We bounced back and forth between the States and Korea. I was born in Houston, and then we moved to Missouri, and then we moved to Korea, and then we moved back to Houston, and then we moved back to Korea. So, it was a lot of
Why
back
so much
and
moving?
forth.
Why so much moving?
My dad had career stuff going on that I'm not super clear on, but he was doing medical training. He's a surgeon, or he's doing, well, he's not a surgeon anymore, but um, he was doing medical training in the United States because the state of the art is, I don't know, more advanced, I guess. And then he would go back to Korea, I think mainly because he was homesick. Like, America is a wonderful place to live a lot of the time, but it's very different from South Korea. And, he was born and raised in Korea, and he just wanted to go home.
Yeah, I asked because so you are quite cultured in, at least with Korea, and I'm sure you've watched the Netflix show Squid Games. Has that given you any further ideas, or what do you think about that? That's actually one of my favorite shows.
I have not watched Squid Games yet,
Oh,
mainly
really?
because
Oh,
people have told me that it gets like super like gruesome. Is that true?
I've only watched the first 2 episodes, and it starts pretty gruesome, so I don't know how the rest of them go.
it is very gruesome, but I mean, it depends what your tolerance is. To me, it was nothing because I'm used to watching a lot of gruesome stuff. But it's a great. It gets you thinking, and you're having lived in Korea and being from South Korea, I thought you could talk a little bit more about the themes and the ideas presented on that show.
Yeah, I haven't seen it, so I'm afraid that I can't help you there.
Do you think your writing with the moving around, do you think that was kind of your having trouble finding the space you belong just because of the constant moving, or kind of how did that factor into it?
Oh yeah, that was definitely a factor. Bouncing back and forth between the U.S. and Korea, as I did. There's a term that I heard a speaker use at my high school once. He called people who grow up sort of in between two cultures third culture kids. And I definitely identified with that feeling of not entirely belonging to one culture or the other. And in some ways, it's a strength because I'm able to relate to both cultures. But in some ways, it does feel a little lonely, I guess, because there isn't one single place that I can call my own. Like, I live in Louisiana right now, and the food is wonderful. I have made friends here, but there's also a part of me that misses Korean food, that misses the mountains and the landscape and the flowers and fauna of South Korea. So, my heart will always be somewhat divided.
Can you tell us a little bit about what the worlds you have created with your writings? Like, I know you wrote the Machineries of Empire. You have your new book, Tiger Honor. Kind of what themes, what worlds are you creating?
I think with Machineries and the Thousand Worlds, one of the things I really wanted to get into was Asians in space. So I love Star Wars and space opera and military sci-fi, but all the books that I read when I was growing up when I was in high school in the 90s, most of the characters were, well, to be blunt, most of the characters were white people and the cultures were Western cultures, and people would go into space and they would be on their starship or on the space station and they would be eating steak and potatoes. They would be eating Western food. And I would say to myself, well, why couldn't it be Koreans in space? Why wouldn't you be eating kimchi and bulgogi in space? And so when it was my opportunity to write a space opera, I said, let's go for it. Like, they won't necessarily have Machineries, they have sort of made up fantasy names, but in the Thousand Worlds, they have Korean names. And I drew on Asian culture and Korean culture because it's like I never saw myself in those space opera stories that I read growing up. So here's an opportunity to sort of widen the field, as it were.
So I got to ask, a space opera, is that essentially, I'm just imagining a musical set in outer space. What is a space opera?
The canonical space opera is Star Wars, where, you have big battleships and starships and, I don't know, the Mos Eisley Cantina, and you have people with laser guns and so on. But there's also a sense of adventure. It's about big things happening, big space battles, the fates of nations. And there's also maybe it's not strictly technological. It's not hard science fiction where everything is calculated and true to the laws of physics as we know it. For example, in Star Wars, you've got the Force, it's basically space magic. So when I write space opera, I'm saying that it's got starships and it's got big space battles, but I play fast and loose with the laws of physics because I'm telling a story. I'm not writing a physics textbook.
Just for my reference, would like Cowboy Bebop, the new Netflix show that's based on the anime, is that kind of like a space opera too?
Yep,
okay.
Absolutely.
So what led you to that? Like, was it just because you like the Star Wars? And like, why is that your genre, do you think?
I think because I've always wanted to go to the stars, even though, okay, I'm scared of heights, which probably doesn't help. But I've always, I watched Star Trek. When I was a kid, when I was 6 years old, my parents showed me the Star Wars trilogy. And that was very traumatic because at the age of 6, I was not prepared for Luke to lose his hand. I hope that's not a spoiler at this point in time. But I really love the fact that people were in space and hopping from planet to planet and having adventures and, eventually the good guys would save the day. So that's sort of why I got into the genre, that sense of adventure and a very big universe with a place for everyone.
So when you're reading, what do you read for fun? Do you read other space operas? You said you like nonfiction as well. So what were the books you were reading that led you to like progress your writing?
Gosh, the books that I have been reading lately, I really love Tamsin Muir's Gideon the Ninth and Harrow the Ninth, which is it's also kind of space opera, but it's very magical. It has necromancers in space and does very wild and interesting things with that. A young adult novel I read and liked recently was, forgive me, I don't know how to pronounce the name. I think it's Shiran J. Zhao's Iron Widow. The last name is Zhao, Zhao. And it takes characters inspired by Chinese history and puts them in this science fictional mecha setting. Like they're fighting mecha battles like, I don't know, Gundam Wing or Neon Genesis Evangelion or Code Geass. So it sort of merges fantasy and science fiction and Chinese history in a very exciting way.
Well, fantastic. Yoon Ha Lee, thank you so much for joining us today. The new book is Tiger Honor, part of the Thousand Worlds series. How long is that series going to be?
Well, I can tell you that I am working on book 3. I actually started on New Year's Day because I was so eager to get to work. And it features Min, the fox spirit from Dragon Pearl, and Sebin, the tiger spirit from Tiger Honor. And they have to survive on a death planet. And I've got all sorts of fun things planned for them.
So you didn't start out with like a 7-book arc that you're going through. It's just kind of book by book for you?
It's pretty much book by book.
Okay. Well, fantastic. The website is yoonhalee.com. That's YOONHALEE.com, yoonhalee.com. Is there anything else you want to leave our listeners with or anything else you'd like to promote?
I have a YA trilogy that will be coming out eventually. And this is Koreans in mecha space opera, and it's called Lancers. And you should look out for that in the next couple of years.
Awesome. Well, fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time today. Again, that website is yoonhalee.com. You can check us out at workfromhomeshow.com. That's workfromhomeshow.com. We really appreciate you listening to our show. Please leave us a review on your podcast platform. We'd greatly appreciate it. And until next week, keep on working from home.